Hi, so today's topic is Politics of the Gilded Age. It's 6-10 in our textbook. The book itself highlights a lot of the farmers' plight during this time period. A reason for that being is in 1870, farmers or people that work in agriculture are still 52% of the American population. By 1900, that figure has shifted to 38%. So there is, a decline in farm work. There's a decline in agricultural work because of different, innovations in technology. But still, even 38% in 1900 is still a significant number of people in the workforce. Industrial jobs are growing by leaps and bounds, yes. Because the book itself focuses so much on the plight of the farmers, I wanted to make this PowerPoint just to go over other aspects of the economy for this time period and things that may show up on your quiz on Thursday. So with Politics of the Gilded Age, what you see here is a couple of political cartoons. You have Ulysses S. Grant here on the left. He's a gymnast, and it says here third term. This says whiskey ring. This says Navy ring. There's a whole bunch of political scandals during the Grant administration. He himself is not considered by historians to have been corrupt, but he trusted. He had been the Civil War general that won the well. He was the last Union general of the Army of the Potomac that defeated Robert E. Lee, and he accepted his surrender in April of 1865. But in the military, if you're a general, you do a lot of delegating of authority because you obviously cannot be at all places at all times. So there are people in his administration, you can see here, that are weighing him down, and they're weighing down his administration, his chances for a third term if he chose to run, the morality of the position, etc. And here you have Grover Cleveland being chased by a woman. We'll get to that story here in a little bit. But one thing you will have to do is you will have to, on the quiz on Thursday, be able to put in order the presidents of the Gilded Age from Grant all the way to McKinley. I will give you word bank, and I'll give you helpful hints on the quiz to help you figure out who goes where. So please make sure you're paying attention to this video, and please also make sure you can take notes too, because it's an open notes test on Friday. So it's up to you to do what you want to do. All right, so the next slide, politics of the Gilded Age, the issues from the federal government, there were three big things. There was civil service reform, the tariff, and the gold standard. So civil service reform is important because government is being staffed by a lot of friends and allies of the president. So they call it the spoil system. It goes all the way back to Andrew Jackson. And oftentimes, people that got these government jobs were people that weren't necessarily the most qualified for these government jobs. There is no merit that goes into who you know. So going back, at the local level, we talk about political machines and urbanization at this time. Boss Tweed at Tammany Hall being the most famous example of political corruption. But again, this is at the city level. At the national level, there's also corruption, which is evidenced here by this political cartoon with Ulysses S. Grant and his administration. There's a lot of people making a lot of money off of government contracts. And a lot of big businesses, again, are getting money. Well, not getting money. A lot of big businesses are getting land grants from the federal government. And there are times that these big businessmen will slip bribes to government officials in order to get these land grants so they can build their factories, build their railroads, whatever it is. So a lot of corruption. What civil service reform is trying to do is trying to clean up the government, trying to limit corruption and inefficiency. So in order to get a lot of government jobs, now you have to take a test. This is passed in 1883 under the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which was passed by Chester Alan Arthur. We'll get to him in a minute. But going back, James Garfield was elected president in 1881 after the administration of Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, if you remember, Rutherford B. Hayes was the man that ended Reconstruction by pulling troops out of the South after the Compromise of 1877. He's famous for his wife was a teetotaler, didn't believe in alcohol, so they didn't have any alcohol in the White House at any public parties, so they called her Lemonade Lucy. But Rutherford B. Hayes' term was pretty much known for its ending of Reconstruction. James Garfield, when he's elected in 1880 and becomes president in 1881, dedicates his presidency to civil service reform, but his presidency is the second shortest in history because in September of that year, he is assassinated by a man named Charles Guiteau. Charles Guiteau was what they call a stalwart. He is a Republican that does not believe in civil service reform. He himself is a bit crazy. He's probably mentally unstable by modern terms. He expected, because he had campaigned for Garfield. Garfield didn't know the guy. He expected that because he campaigned for him that he would get a cushy government job based on the spoils system. Garfield wouldn't even have a meeting with him. So as Garfield is boarding a train in Washington, D.C., Ito shoots him and it doesn't kill him on the spot. They use primitive medical technology to try to probe for the bullet, and then ends up causing an infection, and he ends up passing away. Chester Alan Arthur takes the reins from Garfield. Here's Garfield here on the right. And not positive, I think one of the prerequisites to being a president during this time was that you had facial hair. So you have Rutherford B. Hayes, you have Garfield, now you have Chester Alan Arthur. Chester Alan Arthur was considered to be a dandy. Dandies were people that age that were really well dressed, well groomed, had the latest fashions, hairstyles, etc. And again, looking at him now, he does not look like somebody that we would consider to be on the cutting edge of fashion, but for the time period he was. The irony of Chester Alan Arthur is that he made his life off of patronage in the spoils system, and some would argue corruption itself. He was the head of customs at the Port of New York, and he was involved, or people that worked for him were involved in some large corruption matters. So the fact that Chester Alan Arthur passed the Pendleton Act, which gave us civil service reform, by some people seen as being heroic because he did something that went against his judgment that was the right thing to do. But some would call it ironic too, because he passed the law which ended what made his fortune pretty much. All right, so we move on to Grover Cleveland here in 1885. He becomes the president in 1885 to 1889, and then he wins again in 1893, 1897. He's the only president in history to win 2 non-consecutive terms. He's also the only president during the Gilded Age who's a Democrat. All these other presidents were Republicans. Grover Cleveland, I told you at the beginning there's a political cartoon, and I would explain. Grover Cleveland here on the right is running away from a woman with an umbrella. Well, it turned out during the 1884 campaign that there was a woman that accused Grover Cleveland of fathering a child to her illegitimately. Now, in 1884, that's a scandal. In 2020, that would be a scandal. Grover Cleveland was not married at this time. He would eventually confess and say, yes, this child was mine, which is pretty big when you think about it, because most politicians tend to try to cover up things of political scandals. But Grover Cleveland himself acknowledged that the child was his, and he would take care of it financially. His detractors, or people that ran against him, the Republicans, had this campaign against him, and they would chant, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" Grover Cleveland being an absentee father. And then when Grover Cleveland won in 1884, Grover Cleveland's supporters chanted back, "Gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha," which, again, is hilarious. But so Grover Cleveland's the president. 1889 to 1893, you got Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison is not known for much. He was from Indiana. His grandfather was William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, by the way, was the shortest serving president in history. He only served for 30 days because he died. He got pneumonia shortly after taking office. Benjamin Harrison, the best I can give you, his nickname was the human icicle. If you look at him here, he's a good man. He's a well-intentioned man. He's an honest man, but he lacked charisma. And a lot of the presidents of this time period, they're not powerful men. They were good men. They were honest men. They were moral men. They were hard-working men, but they weren't dynamic presidents the way that we would see Abraham Lincoln back in the 1860s, or Theodore Roosevelt, early 20th century, Franklin Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan. These are men who were more administrative. After the Reconstruction, or during the Reconstruction, during the Andrew Johnson years after the impeachment, the presidency itself lost a lot of its power, and power itself was held more in the hands of Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. All right, and the last president during the Gilded Age here was William McKinley. I told you earlier about the big issues of the time period of tariffs. Tariffs were something that was supported by Republicans. Tariffs are taxes on imports. What that would do is it was considered to be a protective tariff. Republicans are the big business owners. They wanted tariffs on foreign goods so that they would have less competition in America to sell their goods. Democrats opposed the tariff because they said that the tariff raises prices on American goods. If you have more imports and less tariffs, you would have lower prices because there'd be more competition. America's economy at this time is the largest in the world. By 1900, we are the world's largest by far, bigger than England, France, and Germany combined. Because of our economic growth and because of our laissez-faire system of capitalism where the government takes a hands-off approach, you have a lot of booms and you have a lot of busts. You have ups and you have downs. There were 2 depressions during the Gilded Age, the Panic of 1873 and the Panic of 1893. Again, panic is another word for depression. The railroads at this time caused both of them. There was a panic in 1873 that we had talked about in earlier sections. Panic of 1893, which took place during the second Grover Cleveland term, was caused by the failure of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad in eastern Pennsylvania, and that led to 25% of America's railroads going out of business. So there was so much of our economy that was premised on the power of the railroads, to take goods from place to place, all this capital, all this wealth, and all the products that go into making the railroads. So we have booms and busts. Our money at this time is based off of gold. So we have what they call the gold standard. Today in America, we do not have the gold standard anymore. So people that think that are incorrect. In America today, we have what they call fiat currency. Our currency is backed by full faith and credit in our government to back it up with value. At this time, it's based off of gold. Now think about it. In America today, well, in the world today, gold is worth $1,833 per ounce. Silver is worth $24 per ounce. So gold is much more valuable because it's a more rare commodity. It's something that people seek. It has an intrinsic value. It's valued all over the world for what it's made out of. When you have money that's based off of gold, I'm just going to make this very simple. Let's say you can only print $1 for every ounce of gold that you have. If you only have 1 million ounces of gold, you can only print 1 million cash dollars. There's no credit cards this time. There's no PayPal. There's no Bitcoin. This is all cash. So with 1 million ounces of gold, $1 million. The only way that you can print more money is to find more gold. Who is suffering the most from gold standard? It would be the farmers. All right, farmers this time, as you read in the book, because I know that you all read chapter 6-10, farmers this time are having a rough time of it because farm prices are dropping. There's more competition around the world. So in order for farmers to make the money that they used to make, they would have to overproduce crops, which drives the value down. Farmers had to borrow a lot of money from banks. And when you borrow money from banks, you have to pay them back with interest. If your crops don't come back, or if your crops fail, or if you don't make as much money off of your harvest as you expect, you have to borrow more money. So farmers are more indebted than ever to the banks. Farmers want more liquidity in the economy. What that means is more cash. If you have a dollar bill in your pocket and only $1, and I have candy bars for sale, you have a choice to make. I want that candy bar, but all I have is $1. If I spend this dollar on the candy bar, I'm out of money. Whereas if you have $500 in your pocket and I have a $1 candy bar, you're not even going to think twice about buying one. You might buy 5 of them because you have so much money. That's liquidity. Liquidity is how fast you can turn something into cash. Farmers wanted money to be based off of silver and gold. They call that bimetallism. So what that means here is that instead of having 1 million ounces of gold equals $1 million, because silver is there's a lot more silver, and there's all these silver strikes that are being found out west in places like Nevada. Now you would have money based off of gold and silver. So maybe you have 1 million ounces of gold, but you have 20 million ounces of silver. Now you can print 20 million new dollar bills. And I'm just making that scenario up, but just the idea here of more silver equals more liquidity. And if farmers have more money in their pockets, that means that those loans that they took out are going to be easier to pay back because they'll have more money, but their loan amount stays the same, so they can pay that off. They can buy more things. And the more money there is in the economy, the more people are buying and selling, the better it is for the economy in general. Big business owners did not like the idea of going off the gold standard because that would deflate their money, it would inflate their money. It would make it much more valueless. So this was the big push in 1892 and 1896. In 1892, you have a third-party ticket that's formed, the Populist Party. The Populist Party is made up of mostly farmers, people in the Midwest and the South who think that the federal government has left them behind. They're not speaking their language anymore. Because at this time in America, you got the Northeast, which is very heavily industrial. You got the New South, which is trying to become more industrial, but it's also the beginning of the Jim Crow South, where you have African Americans who are facing more uncertain times with sharecropping and having their votes taken away from them and things of that nature. You've got the West here. We have roughly half of America's roughly half of Americans are farmers, but the Midwest here is heavily farmer. So you have this Populist Party that's formed in 1892, and it's running off of the whole idea of bimetallism, money based off of gold and silver. They don't win. They only win roughly 1 million votes, but they do really well at the state level. They win something like 5 governorships. They win, they win Senate seats. They win House of Representative seats. They take over state legislatures in the Midwest. They are a party to be reckoned with. By 1896, the party itself merges with the Democrat Party. Grover Cleveland was what they call a conservative Democrat. he believed in having a gold standard. He believed that you got to be, very sound, fiscally sound. He vetoed a lot of bills because he didn't think you needed to spend money when you didn't need to spend money. Whereas the populist wing of the Democrat Party now is led by a man named William Jennings Bryan. So William Jennings Bryan gave a really famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech. And he says, basically, you will not crucify man on a cross of gold. There are allusions to the Bible here. Obviously, the crucifixion of Jesus. Crucifying man on a cross of gold would be, mankind will not be held hostage to the gold standard. We need bimetallism. He was only 36 years old. His nickname was the Silver-Tongued Orator of the Platte. The Platte is a river that runs in Nebraska. Nebraska is where William Jennings Bryan was from. The Silver-Tongue is, he's a really good speaker. He's an excellent speaker, actually. And he would go around the country barnstorming. At this time, politically speaking, presidents or presidential candidates did not campaign on their own behalf. Other people campaigned for them. So Bryant going on the trains and going across the country and giving, thousands of speeches to try to win people to his side was considered to be against the ordinary, but definitely gave him a national name. William McKinley, here he's pictured right here, is the governor of Ohio. He's actually born in Niles, Ohio. He was raised in Canton, but he is running against Bryan in 1896. William McKinley's candidacy also changes American politics going forward. This is the first election where you get really, really big businessmen involved, giving large amounts of money to the politicians' campaigns. His campaign is run by a man from Cleveland, an industrialist named Mark Hanna. He's funded by guys like John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, who put their personal differences aside to try to get William McKinley elected because they see the future of American business as being in the hands of William McKinley. Because if William Jennings Bryan wins and we go to bimetallism, they're afraid of the future of American business and laissez-faire politics. Well, to end the suspense, William McKinley wins the election of 1896. I wouldn't say easily. If you look at the political map here, it's a very regional victory. McKinley wins the Northeast, he wins the upper Midwest, and he wins California and Oregon. But look at what William Jennings Bryan did. He wins the entirety of the South. Again, at this time in American history, the South is solidly Democrat. But he wins almost every state in the Midwest and in the Northwest. So politics is becoming very regionalized. William Jennings Bryan and the populist party's stances on certain things like direct election of senators, women's suffrage, are not going to win the day in 1896, but by 1920, a lot of what the Populist Party stood for is actually going to be adopted by the major parties themselves. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to shift real quick. I'd like to go over the vocab for your homework because you do have a quiz on Thursday. I want to make sure that we are able to go over all of that together. The Depression of 1893, or the Panic of 1893, we talked about caused by the failure of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, and that has a ripple effect across the entire economy. And the Depression is called the Great Depression until the 1930s Great Depression. So in which case this was going to be remembered as the Panic of 1893 or the Depression of the 1890s. The Grangers, that was a farmers grouping, 1867 that was formed because in the West, farming is very lonely. You could live miles away from your nearest neighbor. So Grangers or Granges were places that farmers could meet. They were cultural experiences, they were social experiences. But they would also do things like form cooperatives. So they thought the best way to sell their crops was to sell it in bulk. So if you sell it individually, the prices of your crops are going to remain low. But if you put them in bulk, you can have more negotiating power and maybe sell them for a higher price. Also, too, if you buy in bulk, there's a reason that you go to Walmart and things are cheaper than if you go to a mom and pop family-owned grocery store, because they can buy in bulk. So Grangers also do things like buying in bulk so that they could get consumer products to farmers cheaper. Interstate Commerce Commission, big businesses, especially the railroads got in trouble because they were charging farmers in the Midwest who only had one railroad option much higher prices than they were the big industrialists out east who would ship in bulk. So the Interstate Commerce Commission was formed to try to keep railroad prices fair, because if you have to pay an extreme amount of money to ship your goods, your business is going to suffer. Farmers alliances in the Grangers go together. The idea here is there's strength in numbers. So there was an African American Farmers Alliance, there was a Southern Farmers Alliance, a Northern Farmers Alliance. Eventually they're going to merge because there's strength in numbers. The farmers are doing everything they can to try to have political power. The Populists, that's the party that came out in 1892 that ran as a third party ticket that the Democrats bring into the Democrat tent and run William Jennings Bryan in 1896. Coxey's army. In 1894, Jacob Coxey was from Ohio, and he and many other people like him were out of work because of the Depression of the 1890s, the Panic of 1893. So what he and a large group of followers did was they marched from Ohio to Washington, D.C. They called this the March on Washington. So when we think March on Washington, you probably think like Martin Luther King in 1963. The whole idea here is that they're going to march in numbers to demand that the government does more to try to help them out through this Depression of 1893. When he got to Washington, D.C. in 1894, he was coldly greeted by the government, and he was imprisoned for marching without a permit. He did not get his way. Cox's army was a failure, but it showed that the masses themselves were willing to mobilize against the government. And when you have all these industrial workers who are out of work, it makes politicians think twice about their policies towards the working class. I trust that you read the book, and I trust that you answer these questions properly. Just remember, during this time, Congress has more power than the president, but Congress itself, in many ways, is very corrupt. Presidents become less powerful after the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. Farmers having a tough time of it, et cetera, et cetera. If anybody has any questions, obviously, feel free to email me, or when you're done here watching this and you do your Ed Puzzle questions, we'll discuss them as a class.